Okay, we have 2 minutes to go. I've come early for those early joiners, and welcome everyone who is here already. We'll give it another minute or so, and then we will start off the session. So get a cup of tea, turn off your mobile, and let's look at why brain science matters today. If you've got any questions, put them in the chat. It would be great to hear anything that you want to say, anything that you want to input. That would be amazing. So thank you for that. Minute to go. I wonder how people are doing on this very autumnal Tuesday. Feels a little bit like winter, but hey, I can see people are joining, so lovely to see you. Thank you for joining us. Someone's just said, thank you for the reminder for turning off our mobiles. It's not automatic nowadays, is it? We're 24/7. Okay, it's 12:30. I'm going to get started. So thank you so much for taking time out of what I would imagine is a pretty busy schedule. I'm here today. Normally, I'm here with Rena. She is actually delivering live to India, so it's just me today. I've done lots of preparation. I've done lots of practice of all the tech, but that doesn't mean to say that live it's all going to work. So if there are any glitches, please bear with me. This is my first time where I'm driving all of the slides and the show. Okay, so today we are going to take a deep dive into the brain's overarching organizing principle. I call it the limbic PFC dance. It is one of the most primal, hardwired drives that literally determine everything that we feel, think, and how we act. For those people who've joined us before, you'll be quite familiar with the limbic PFC dance as a concept. So this will refresh it for you. It will bring it to the forefront of your awareness. We're also then going to explore and showcase the S.C.A.R.F model developed by David Rock. We'll go into more detail about how he came up with this very, very effective tool. In fact, in 20 years of coaching peak performance, I think this is one of the most effective tools that I have shared with hundreds of clients who have all used it to make sure that we can master our brains with our minds. So we'll look at the application of how we can use the S.C.A.R.F model to ensure that in the dance of the limbic and PFC system, we are actually leading. I'm also joined today by a great friend and my esteemed colleague, Tom Freeston. He's a music producer, sound engineer, and musician. He's been with me since the inception of my company 7 years ago. And he's very, very familiar with everything we're covering today. And we're lucky enough for him to be sharing his own personal experience of using this tool, as well as the professional applications. There are a myriad of applications. Once we know how the brain works, as David Rock said, whose institute I trained at, it actually literally changes everything. Okay. So before we get started, we're going to do a little reminder of what TBQLiVE actually is. We are here every second and fourth Tuesday for 45 minutes, and we look at all the different levers in Rena's book, The Brilliance Quotient. She actually wrote it pre-pandemic. However, she was quite prophetic because one of the strap lines of the book is how to be the best leader in unpredictable times. Little did she know, with all the pandemic that's happening, these are more disrupted and unpredictable times than I think most of us have ever experienced. So we raise awareness, we discuss solutions, We host experts and we engage with all of you so that you can get the very, very best out of your thinking. And let's face it, nowadays, most of us are paid to think, so it's a great thing to be able to do. So I'm going to bring Tom in now. And hi, Tom.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, that's quite all right. Lovely to see you. Lovely to be here.
Exactly. Lovely that you could join us. So what we're going to do now is we are going to talk about the limbic PFC dance. What do I mean by that? What I mean is we have an ancient early warning alarm system in our brain that was first seen in mammals over 150 million years ago. It's in the center, deep in the center of our brain. And actually what happens before our brain does anything else, this is known as the brain's overarching organizing principle, because it does this before it does anything else. Okay, so the brain is scanning for danger 15 times a second. If any threat is perceived, and that could be physical or psychological, because the brain makes no difference between a psychological threat and a physical threat, because both mean danger of death. And I say danger of death because the limbic system, and you can see on the photo here, the limbic system is deep within our brain, and it actually acts quite differently. It's very, very primal, and it's very black and white in its processing. So it's going, if this is even a small threat, there is a possibility of danger of death. And what happens is there's a functional and chemical cascade when any threat is perceived. So first of all, we release adrenaline, which potentializes our muscles, so much so that a woman actually lifted up a car and got her child from underneath, because adrenaline is that powerful. And there's also cortisol, which is released. Now, cortisol, as I've said to you, Tom, many times, it's got a bit of a bad reputation. It's stressing where to put our attention. So what it does is it turns off your stomach, because that's far too energetic a process. All of the energy is taken from all parts of our brain and shunted down our spinal cord, readying us for fight, flight, or freeze. And what's really nice nowadays is a lot of people are really familiar with that phrase. A lot of people are very familiar with fight and fright, not always freeze. Freeze is very useful should there be a pack of wolves around, because you don't want to be running, because that means your dinner. And if you're not going to win a fight against a wolf. So, okay, so all our energy is shot into our muscles. What also happens because of that, all of the energy is taken away from other brain systems. Most predominantly the PFC, the prefrontal cortex. That is where we do our higher executive functions. It's the part of your brain that's watching us and processing all the information we're talking about. It's where we have decision-making capacity, where we think rationally, reasonably, and sequentially. It's where our awareness of being alive is. So basically, it's where we're aware of being aware, which is a sentence I always really enjoy saying. It's also where our short-term memory lies, and I'll focus on that slightly later, because if we are in a limbic state, a negative limbic state, and I say that because our limbic system is also the house of our emotions. It's where we have emotional connection. It's why we love the certain things that we love. So when I talk about the limbic system, in this instance, I'm talking about the negative side of the limbic system, not the positive side, which is about connection and feeling great. So all of this thinking up here, I'm pointing here because this is where the PFC lives, just behind our forehead. You know Rodin's thinker? He totally got it spot on. It was exactly where the forehead was. So what also happens is our field of vision narrows, because actually I don't need the foreground. If there's a saber-toothed tiger over there, I need to zone out the foreground and just focus on the threat that's coming towards me. But as I also said earlier, the brain makes no difference between psychological and physical threat or function. So what actually happens is not only does my physical field of vision narrow, but also my psychological field of vision narrows, i.e. I can't think about choices. Yeah, because thinking is a very, very executive function. Conscious thinking is too expensive. The PFC uses 20% of the body's overall resources, and that energy, when we are negatively limbic, is needed for our muscles. So the field of vision narrows, which also means that I'm not able to think about choices that usually in a balanced system, because it does act a bit like a seesaw, in terms of if I am under threat and in that negative limbic state, my PFC is not functioning. So it acts like a seesaw, but we call it a dance because they interplay. And Tom came up with a brilliant quote the other day. I hope you don't mind me using it, Tom, about the fact that actually a dance, we decided it's probably the tango. And one of the things that this knowledge of knowing how the brain works is so powerful is because who's leading the dance? Is it our primal system? Because our limbic system is our most primal basic function. It is absolutely running the show unless we master our brain with our minds. And the way that we can do that is by using David Rock's incredibly powerful S.C.A.R.F model. So Dr. David Rock, he is very big in the field of applying neuroscience. He works with all of the FTSE and Fortune 500 companies. I went to his institute in London, and it was there that I suddenly came upon all of the amazing and powerful applications that all of the findings from the field of neuroscience can actually give us. So David Rock took metadata from literally thousands of neuroscience studies that had looked into the physical and application side of how our brain works. Now that fMRIs have allowed us, all the imaging programs have allowed us to actually look deep inside the brain and work out what the brain function is going and which system is doing what and affecting what. So David Rock's S.C.A.R.F is the distillation of thousands of neuroscience studies that basically say if we're in a negative limbic situation, i.e. we're under threat, our thinking's turned off, what can we do? What's the hack that pushes our brain to actually go out of that primal mode of survival and into a thinking state again? So he talks to the fact that actually we need our S.C.A.R.F. Obviously, it's an acronym, everything is. So he talks first to status, because if you think about this system, it was actually developed when we were getting into tribes. So when we were getting together, where you were in the pecking order made a huge difference to your opportunity to survive. If you were high up, you were going to be given all of the resources. You would have a great place to live. If you were lower down in the pecking order, things might be more difficult for survival. The other thing that the brain needs to make it feel calm after feeling threatened is certainty, which is really cute of the brain, because the only thing we're certain of is there is no certainty. And I think that's even more prominent nowadays than ever before. Certainty is essential for the brain, and it's not sophisticated certainty. It's the kind of certainty that says, I know where I'm sleeping tonight, I know what I'm eating, I've got some good water that won't affect me adversely. It's more about the, Maslow's hierarchy, those basic needs. When the brain is certain of where its basic needs are coming from, that calms the brain. And the S.C.A.R.F model is about calming the negative limbic response and bringing the thinking part of our brain back online. The third letter in S.C.A.R.F is about autonomy. Very much like, I'm lucky, I'm about to go to Portugal. I'm going to get on a plane. There will be an air hostess. She will tell me to put my air mask on before I help anybody else. And that's basically what autonomy in this model is referring to. I need to know I can look after myself. I cannot rely on someone else to pick me up and run me away from that saber-toothed tiger. The R for within S.C.A.R.F stands for relatedness. And that's one of the most simple of the levers to make sure that our brain can calm back down. Are people a friend or are they a foe? Yeah. And one of the things that happen is the brain ensures that everyone is considered an enemy until we know better, because that's better survival. And especially nowadays, at the moment, we may really enjoy looking at other people. We're kind of back out a little bit now. We're being around people, but social distance has really got hardwired in quite quickly, because we're not 100% sure that if someone comes too close to us, they're not going to turn into the enemy that gives us COVID, etc. And I'd like to say at this point, we are all on low limbic alert. Tom and I have talked about this a lot, haven't we, Tom?
Definitely, definitely. Right now, I think just the conditions are ripe in the world for worry. You know, you don't need to actively think about worrying. It happens. You know, you turn on the news, you go outside and you see people queued with face masks. It makes you internally just a little bit stressed, doesn't it? So yeah, no, we are at present. It's really easy to find yourself on that low level limbic alert without really thinking about it.
Yeah, exactly. It's that we're not even actually aware of it, because also 90% of brain function is outside of our awareness. You know, if the brain had to think about all of the amazing things it does, we would not have enough spare capacity to do very much else. So a lot of this is very, very subconscious, and bear that in mind. Bringing things up to the consciousness means that we are able to actually start to affect change, positive change. And the last letter in S.C.A.R.F is fairness. Fairness is a huge factor in helping us feel calm, included, and have the best possible brain function. And that's because, as I said, these systems were being finessed as we were getting together in tribes. And if I'm treated fairly, that's fine. I can thrive and survive. If I'm not treated fairly, then I'm not necessarily even going to be able to survive, let alone thrive. For all of those joining us who have children, that's one of the first things that children are quick to point out. It's not fair. And I always look at children when they're in that mode and just think that is the primal animal in us going, I need it to be fair, or else my chances of survival are diminished. And although we are incredibly sophisticated, civilized animals, in actual fact, we're primal animals first and foremost. Okay, so we've talked about the limbic system. Yeah, it works like a dance and a seesaw. It will run the show unless we use this incredible tool. So how are we going to use this tool? So what we're going to do now is I'm going to hand over to Tom, and he's going to start talking and sharing with you his own personal experience of using the S.C.A.R.F model. And over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Maria. Yes, well, I was first introduced to the S.C.A.R.F model so far long ago, more than 15 years ago now, by the fine Maria Chase, whose face you see there. I was a student at the time, and I'd come into contact with Maria through her role as an additional needs coordinator at a specialist college. I didn't know it at the time. I was undiagnosed for a number of years, but I've come to understand now that I suffer from bipolar disorder. It's very quick background is a mood instability disorder. It has a neurological and biological root, but it basically it means that there's a general instability and inability to effectively manage your mood. Coming across S.C.A.R.F was an enormously powerful moment for me at this time, and it has been ever since. What it allowed me to do as an individual, the model it kind of offered, was to help me really work with my own personal internal narrative. So the worst language we ever use in the world is usually reserved to the inside of our own heads, and it's aimed at ourselves 9 times out of 10. So one of the ways we can use S.C.A.R.F is to really help change that internal narrative, the words we use to talk about ourselves, and understand our own kind of, I suppose, mood in the midst of all of this. So going through it point by point, there's a good few things that I can point you to how you can use this model to really help improve your own internal narrative. Now, as we talk to status, that's generally the first thing you want to do there is to stop using those nasty words. You know, when you make a mistake, when something goes wrong in life, it's about not blaming yourself. It's about not turning around and saying things like, I'm useless. This is all my fault. There is everything going wrong. You know, it's about learning how to appreciate the fact that you are an individual. I mean, as the slide points out, a very good place to start is to point out that the odds of being alive and being born in this universe are 1 in 400 trillion. You know, the very fact that we are sat here living, breathing in and out, you know, just generally being these biomechanical objects is a victory, you know, and it serves to your status. You know, you are a living thing and you have that. I do also want to mention on status that we can exploit the negative in order to make ourselves feel a little bit better. And a good example of this is something that psychologists refer to as downward social comparison. It's worth noting that we can and we do get a lift. You know, our neurochemistry makes us feel better when we are mean to other people sometimes. We can exploit that to help ourselves feel better. I'm not saying we all need to go out in the world and start telling everyone how horrible they are, but it can be very useful in a quiet moment in your own head to just sit there and reflect, well, you know, at least I'm not as bad as them. So that is something that can really help with your status, and it's definitely helped me. It's helped improve my internal narrative and helped bring me, I suppose, a little bit more self-respect just inside the head.
I've got to chip in, Tom, because I remember you first sharing this idea in reference to Jeremy Kyle, was it? That awful program?
Yeah. No, I have a good friend. She's a trained psychologist. She's going into mental health nursing. She's a brilliant mind and she's a fabulously positive person. And before Jeremy Kyle was cancelled, that was literally her therapy. Sometimes she would put on Jeremy Kyle just so she could sit there and think, well, you know, it might be bad, but at least I'm not on a stage on ITV being shouted at by Jezza. So one of the many roles. Now, in terms of certainty, and as Maria mentioned before, I just want to highlight that the brain doesn't necessarily need complex certainty. I personally am a stickler for believing that certainty is scant generally in the world, but that doesn't mean that we can't find a little bit of it in knowing that we have a roof over our head. You know, we know that we can get another meal in. We know that however complicated life may be, we can usually find a way of staying safe and getting through those situations. You know, so it's that kind of, it's that low level certainty you're looking to kind of get grips on. You know, it's very difficult. I myself am quite big on physics and quantum mechanics, and the more you look into physics and science, the more uncertainty can seem like the only real certainty we have. Right, but it's about not getting too lost in those larger concepts and bringing it back to the lower level kind of individual, these are the things I need to be certain of. Now, in terms of autonomy, there are several ways you can really work with your own internal narrative on autonomy. Just for a start, it's about expressing what you feel happy doing. So, I mean, we all work in our professional lives. We all take on jobs and roles that we don't want. But there are within these narratives of life that build up around us, there are little things that we can find our way enjoying. You know, I'd highlight autonomy by asking the question, how do you clean a toilet, for instance? You know, each and every one of us has a different methodology for that. You could ask a room full of people how they clean their toilet, and you will get a room full of different answers that all result in a clean toilet. So it's just about recognizing that whilst You might have a different way of doing it, right? That way is your way and it works, right? So that's, you can work with your own methodologies, your own little individual quirks and foibles to really, satisfy that need for autonomy. Maria?
What always brings to mind is the fact that actually every brain wiring is totally unique. It's as unique as our fingerprints. So yes, indeed, the way we clean a toilet is very different, each and every one of us. So yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because it's worth mentioning as we go through this that each and every brain is as unique as a fingerprint. There is, when you're learning to work with the brain and bring all of these systems online together, it's worth mentioning that there is no one right way. It comes down to how you see it, how you feel it. So it is, we can all lean on other people. We can all go to different schemes and structures to find things that work for ourselves, but understand that, it is down to you. And as a consequence of that, there's a freedom in that to being able to pull and rip and borrow strategies from a number of different areas. And all of them can kind of really help with this model and keeping your internal narrative on the positive side. So you can lead that dance, as we say. Now, in terms of relatedness, this was something that I had a major problem with in the early days of learning to overcome my own personal emotional territory. I've always been a bit of a lone wolf, so to speak. So that can lead to difficulties in relatedness, in just finding that tribe that works for you. But that's exactly how I will say it, and leaning back onto the point about individuality. It is about finding that tribe that's right for you. Not all of us are ever going to have that one whole tribe that works entirely and completely for all of us. Most of us are going to go out and find different relationships, personal and professional, that enable us to do different things and express different versions of ourselves, and that help us process ourselves. I would point to Maria as being a very good friend and colleague for an awful lot of stuff. If I'm having any kind of bad day, I can pick up the phone to Maria. 5 minutes of whinging later, and we're good. Everything is fine in the world. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to call Maria for absolutely everything. Right? I have other people. There are other ways and other means. And again, it's about, especially in times like this, being able to have other methods of communication and feel related to people as well. It doesn't just have to be the face-to-face, we're getting together for a coffee. It can be that Zoom, it can be that text message. It can even be just that, I've seen a thing on Netflix, you need to go and watch it now, and then in 3 days we're going to come together and talk about it. So it's making sure you're open to all those different levels of personal relationships to deal with your own internal relatedness to others. And in fairness, well, I think, as Maria said, the first thing most children learn how to say is, it's not fair. And that is the truth, is the world is not fair. We can't, in deep moments of strife, ever look at the world to find some fairness. So we have to come in on our own. And one of the cliches I will throw about fairness is how charity begins at home. Mm-hmm. If we are going to see fairness in a bigger world, we have to learn to be fair with ourselves. And that again comes with that internal narrative. It comes with being over that kind of, when you make a mistake, be fair on yourself. Don't be hard. Don't beat yourself up. Go, okay, it was a mistake. We can analyze where I went wrong and then draw a line under it, and celebrate your own personal victories as you go. That's how you can ensure fairness when the world isn't fair and we have to kind of create our own fairness. It helps to celebrate the good things, even the tiny little good things. That phone call that you've been putting off for 3 weeks because it's a bit of a waste of your life, but you still need to do it. You know, if you've done that, that's a victory. That's a Pyrrhic victory sometimes. So it's just about kind of keeping yourself, I suppose, on a good level as you go through this. And the more you're able to affect your own internal narrative and your own internal voice and feelings, the more power and leverage you then have to and influence the world around you and improve their S.C.A.R.F as well.
Absolutely. And that brings us on to the next slide. But just before we do, what really resonated there is that sense of being fair to ourselves, making sure our own S.C.A.R.F's okay, because negative does scream. When it comes to our brain's overarching organizing principle, we're hardwired to take more notice of negative, because negative is danger of death. If I'm at a party and I'm having a great time, my brain doesn't need to care. But the smallest thing, a siren going by, and everyone at the party will instantly, primarily stop and watch a sound, which makes no sense whatsoever. But we're all just, that's our primal system overtaking, going, I'm leading the dance at the moment. I'm checking out if anything's a danger of death. Okay, so what we're going to do now, we're going to go on to look at how you can use S.C.A.R.F in teams. The way I'm going to frame this today, and the application I'm going to use today, is about communication, because we all know that great comms mean great teamwork. So it's about, if we're implementing the S.C.A.R.F model within a team, it's about use every member of that team. Number one, being aware, and number two, actioning it. Let's face it, we're all aware of how we could be better, but it's not always easy to action, especially if we're in a low-level limbic alert. So if we have S.C.A.R.F in our brain, then that allows us to reach for it as a tool when we need it. Everyone, 1 in 400 trillion. So the person in front of you is an absolute awesome miracle, because those odds are high. I used to be a croupier. I deal in odds and I used to deal in odds and gambling, and those are very, very high odds. So we're all amazing. So it's also about, just as we've both alluded to, bringing it back to that kind of basics. If someone's stood in front of you in your team, they're a human being, regardless of their role, regardless of their responsibilities. And if you do find someone challenging, it's about bringing it back to that. They're a human being. I've worked, 20, 25 years working with people for peak performance. And I don't know, and have yet to meet many people who aren't doing the best they can with what they've got. So it's also affording people that kind of generosity. When it comes to certainty in a team, it's about really clear examples. What do you need to do? What's expected of you? What are your roles and responsibilities? A lot of businesses have a real problem with teamwork, because the actual person who's delegating and running that team isn't clear of their responsibilities and who's delegated to what. So if you are a leader in this situation, it's about being really, really clear with people about what's expected of them. And also, there are things that we don't always know, but very often, if some change is coming or something needs to be done within a certain time frame, if you don't know that time frame, let people know when you will know. Because what the brain does is, if I say to Tom, right, in 3 weeks' time, we will know, Tom's brain will literally dump all of that worry, concern, or whatever thinking is going on and go, okay, in 3 weeks' time, I'll know. Because the brain's an energy efficient machine. If it doesn't need to use energy, your brain won't use energy. And this thinking part, the bit we're all here using, 20% of the body's overall resources. So if the brain can dump something, then that is a great thing to do. And if you leverage that kind of basic certainty, you're going to get the best out of your team. Now, when it comes to autonomy, it's really important. We've talked about it and alluded to the fact that every brain is different. So how I will do something to achieve an outcome is not necessarily how Tom will do it. It makes no difference. As long as we get the outcome that we're looking for, it doesn't matter whether it takes him this amount of time, that amount of time. If I am slower, he is quick, who cares? It doesn't matter, as long as that outcome is reached. So it's also about ensuring that people can make choices about how they get there. You know, that's the awful cliche micromanaging. Don't tell someone how to do something, tell someone what to do and let their brain decide how to do it. As long as you get your outcome, you don't mind. And also, if possible in teams, the more you involve everyone in decision making, the better it's going to be. It talks to their autonomy, it calms their brain down, and it also means that everyone is aligned and on the same kind of page. And within teams, that, you know, the alignment of thinking and goals is essential for a really good outcome. Relatedness. If you're in a team, you should all have each other's back. Now, I am very much an idealist, and I'm never going to let go of that. I'm more than happy to be an idealist. And it would be great if every team feels like they all have each other's back. However, that isn't always the case. If you implement the S.C.A.R.F model, that becomes one of the fundamentals of the team dynamic. And that's the thing. One of the things that neuroscience gives us are some really good, tangible fundamentals. You put the fundamentals in place, the rest can just happen on such a secure base. And the last thing is fairness. Now, when it comes to teams, it's about treating everyone equally. And what is wonderful as we progress in our working practices, as we progress in our ways of being, equality and diversity is, you know, front and center, and that's so important. You know, I love the phrase neural diversity, because someone whose brain is wired differently, so for example, someone on the autistic spectrum, their way of getting to things can be so amazingly insightful that my brain would never have got there. So this fairness, treating everyone with fairness and that kind of equality, means that for sure you're going to get the most out of teamwork. Anything to add there, Tom? Did I miss anything?
No, I'd say you covered that fairly effectively.
Excellent. Okay, I'll take that. Thank you. So the next thing that we're going to go on to is, how do we instill this in company culture? TBQLiVE always looks at things from the three angles: on an individual level, because that's where we all start, at a team level, and then as part of a company culture. Now, I strongly believe, I know David Rock completely supports this thinking, if we introduce S.C.A.R.F as a fundamental in induction programs, a lot of the pitfalls, a lot of the challenges that happen later when the induction process isn't necessarily as extensive as it could be, will be solved by S.C.A.R.F. I'm not saying it solves absolutely everything, but it solves a great deal. So if we actually, I mean, we've done it ourselves, haven't we, Tom? We've been up in London recently talking to a fintech company and getting everyone on the same page so that managers can actually talk to their teams, and it becomes part of their culture to say, are we looking at everyone's S.C.A.R.F? Yeah, I mean, I kind of wanted to buy them scarves, but it was just too obvious. So we didn't do that. But we were, sorry, Tom?
Tempting.
It was very tempting. So if it's a fundamental at the beginning of any induction process, it then means that it can become part of that fundamental culture, so that people aren't even thinking about it. It becomes an automatic response and reaction to take into account people's S.C.A.R.F.
And just to dive in there, I think that is essentially the most powerful place, I think, for this model. It's not when you have to consciously work to, I mean, that's the early phase of implementation, obviously, but when this is sat at the core, it's not something you generally refer to. You know, you don't consistently go back to referring to S.C.A.R.F. You instead deal with the human being, team member, manager in front of you in that way. It just becomes part of your own natural narrative as a person to then be in the institution working like that.
it's got to be said, and I mean, both of us have experienced this when we're training and coaching people, is once you illuminate S.C.A.R.F for people, everything changes. They use it on themselves. It's something you revisit. Like Tom says, it's not always overt. You're not always using the language, but it's something that is constantly there and allows you to kind of work through. Company-wide training, we've talked about that. It is the heart of equality and diversity. S.C.A.R.F is such a powerful model for a meaning that actually that is taken care of. What is wonderful is we have this huge amount of awareness, and we do need to do positive action because equality and diversity isn't as good as it could be, and it's only just beginning to really find its feet, would be my experience.
Just to dive in quickly there, the point I would make about S.C.A.R.F being the heart of equality and diversity for business is that it's a beautiful model in that it's not statistical. In terms of equality and diversity, I mean, there is always a challenge when you are implementing equality and diversity training and culture through any company. But I think one of the fallbacks of the modern world is that it becomes statistical. It becomes about numbers rather than people. You know, you're talking about filling quotas and affirmative action, and you kind of lose the point of having an equal and diverse team, which can bring you massive power. When you use something like S.C.A.R.F to satisfy the equality and diversity, you know, legislation that we all should, you fall away from that statistical kind of, we're chasing numbers, and you're able to then build diverse teams that don't even think about it. You know, it doesn't become a personal issue. It doesn't become a race issue or a sexuality issue or a gender issue. It just becomes about dealing with the people and the teams. And personally, for me, I can't think of a better way for managing equality and diversity in the modern world.
Absolutely. It almost renders it a non-issue, doesn't it? It's
yeah, like, no, that's it. And in the way it kind of, we should be working towards. It should not be an issue in any of our society. None of these things should be. And S.C.A.R.F speaks to that. S.C.A.R.F kind of, it helps deal with the individual level so that the institutions can be, you know, as equal and as diverse as possible.
As we all are, you know, even within ourselves, there are so many facets to us. It's not like we are just one personality at one time, but that would be another broadcast we won't go into now. So it's about, when we're using S.C.A.R.F as part of a company culture, it's about consistently reinforcing it. I mean, I've been working with the financial director of the fintech company, and one of the things that he was saying is, well, it's taking a while. And this is new language for a lot of people. For some people, it's really coming into awareness. For other people, they've never come across it. So when you're first implementing these kind of things to transform cultures, it's about just reinforcing it in different ways, in fun ways, because the brain actually takes up information and wants to do things if it's having fun. And the last point we're going to make is about challenge and problem solving, using S.C.A.R.F as a challenge and problem solving model. And I think a really important point that is worth raising is, at the moment, a lot of people are really confused about, what do I do that's right? You know, we are so bombarded with the fact that actually we can be accidentally, you know, exclusionary, be that gender, sexuality, whatever. And people are beginning to really pussyfoot around. And actually, that helps nobody. Yeah, but it's due usually to confusion. I'd rather not say anything than say something that may offend someone. And I understand that. I really get that desire not to outwardly actively offend, but it can mean that we are pussyfooting around. Whereas actually, in organizations and in teams and within individuals, we do need to challenge and have a problem-solving model. And the great thing about S.C.A.R.F is, when you have implemented that, you don't have to take all of these things into consideration. That's a lot for your PFC, which is a very small part of your brain, to be dealing with and constantly taking into consideration. So By using S.C.A.R.F, that part of it is taken care of, which means that you can then be real and authentic and create an ideal environment for challenge or problem solving. Okay, I can see our time was running out. I was wondering if we were going to fit within time. Tom and I could wax lyrical about how genius S.C.A.R.F is for days.
4 days.
Because we have just seen it on the ground. We have a phrase in our company, the work works, doesn't it, Tom?
Oh, it works. It works so well.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's not about numbers or statistics, but this is one of the most effective, statistically significant pieces of tool that I give anybody. It's an amazing piece of kit. I hope everyone has seen that actually you can apply it to yourself, because the brain will go limbic, negatively limbic, outside of your awareness instantaneously. There's nothing you can do about that. That is actually, there's a lot of research at the moment that says I actually go limbic before I even know I've gone limbic, because this part's catching up. My awareness of what's going on is catching up. So in actual fact, this is automated. Our primal survival response will happen whether you like it or not. What we can do and how we can best master our brains and our thinking is with our mind and using the S.C.A.R.F model. Thank you so much for joining me, Tom. I've thoroughly
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Absolutely. I'm now going to talk about what we're going to talk about in our next TBQLiVE, when Rena will be joining us again, which is the neuroscience of business, because everyone is creative, not can be, but is. And actually, Tom, as a musician and a music producer and a sound engineer, I think you can attest to that.
Yeah, I can most definitely attest to that. We are all creative beasts. It's what we live for.
It is absolutely what we live for. So we're going to be taking a deep dive into that on November the 9th. We're making it a 2-part series. And really exploring which part of your brain does what creatively and how you can leverage that to be even more creative. Okay, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. It's been an absolute pleasure being here. Thank you so much, Tom.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be here. I hope everyone has got something out of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, have a great Tuesday. Bye.
Bye.